So here we are right in the village centre, and the first thing you'll notice is cars and the horse and cart, which has been a service. Horse and carts would go back to Saxon times as well. But the most significant thing about the village centre is this is a crossroads. And in one direction you've got the road down to Livermead, and you've got another road that's called the Totnes Road, because that went to Totnes, and another road behind me that it actually goes to Newton Abbot. It's now called Cockington Lane. I don't know if that was ever called Newton Road, but that used to be where it went. And the road over there goes to Torquay. And right at the crossroads you've got the forge, which did everything with wrought ironwork, including, of course, it would have been the place where they would fix the carriages. And if you look at the forge, now the forge is world famous. If you ask people anywhere in the world if they've heard of Cockington, the first thing they'll say is they've heard of Cockington Forge. And if you look, it has a distinctive overhang. It should only have 3 pillars at the front. The 4th pillar has been added and is quite controversial, but the 4th pillar on the left-hand side is actually the entrance where the carriages would go through into the forge. There's a wheelwright's plinth in there, and so they could work on repairing the carriages in there in all weathers. The forge itself that we're looking at today is probably 17th, 18th century building, but we have a record of the forge being on this site going back, the earliest written record is 1615, when Anthony Hopping was the striker and the blacksmith was a man called Davey, which is interesting because the Victorian blacksmith in the late 19th century was also called William Davey. It'd be lovely to think that there was a family connection there, but I doubt it. But nevertheless, there has been a forge continually on this site for hundreds of years, possibly back to Saxon times, but that building you're looking at is definitely 17th, 18th century in origin. Then over opposite the forge, we have what's today called Rose Cottage. Unfortunately, the current owner has removed all the roses, so we're not quite sure why it's called Rose Cottage anymore. But originally that was called Daveys Cottage, because cottages in the old days were named after the families that lived in them, and of course the blacksmith was the Davies, so that is Daveys Cottage. And in fact there's a famous illustration of it in the 1880s in the London Illustrated magazine. It was always been a very photogenic place and is very well known. And finally you've got Court Cottage. Now Court Cottage is a very interesting building. It's originally a Devon long house where you would have the family living at the back, and the front was a shippen. There would be no window there. You would just have farm animals living in there. But between 1862 and 1892 it was converted into the schoolroom, and you had Susanna Doney, the schoolmistress, with 5 of her own children plus the village children, and she was paid £12 a year to run the schoolhouse. And the very nice, interesting local bit of history here is the connection it has with the second richest woman in Victorian England, Angela Burdett Coutts. She was the heir to the Coutts Bank fortune. There was the Queen of England, who was the richest woman in England, and the second richest woman, Angela Burdett Coutts, was known as the Queen of the Poor. And she built churches in London, and down here in Torquay she had a villa on the seafront, long gone sadly, but she had a strong connection with Cockington because she felt strongly that the dame schools that were there in Court Cottage needed to have some kind of standard. She felt that she wanted some kind of standards, and so she paid for a school inspector to raise the standard of all the dame schools in the area. And they met actually in the kitchen at Cockington Court, and Angela Burdett Coutts wasn't afraid of doing some teaching of her own, so she probably did some teaching in there. I lived in that house for 33 years and never knew that such an important person had once been in there, which is fantastic. And finally, the house itself, Court Cottage, that is a direct connection to Cockington Court. We think in the early 1700s it was the Dowager House for the court, and that's probably where it's got its name from. We know that there are Queen Anne fittings in there when we think it was just refurbished, so we can date it back to then, and then it might have been 200 or 300 years older than that. The village itself, here, you're looking at, there would have always been something here right back to Saxon times, but obviously nothing here is Saxon, but they're all setting on Saxon sites. All farm buildings, all related to the farming and agricultural industry that is Cockington. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, don't worry. Yeah. Don't worry. Yes, where the